So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Uh, Grew up Catholic, uh, went to church every Sunday with the family, all my siblings. I didn't really engage with it intellectually as a kid. And so by the time my confirmation came around, that was pretty much the last time I was going regularly. It's kind of common around here, I guess, in my generation. I hate to say it. Um, so yeah, so like the next time I can foreshadow a little bit in the conversation, like church shopping down the road a little bit.
Okay.
Uh, didn't go so well either. And can
What
get into
part
that.
you don't have to be real specific. What part of the states do you live in? Northeast,
Uh,
South,
Greater
what?
Boston.
Greater Boston. Oh, okay. All right, good.
Yeah. So
So if I do an event up in New England, you'll come.
I've been begging you to come here.
Okay,
I've been
all right.
no, I'm just kidding, Paul. No, I've been writing in the comments, hey, when you coming to New England? When's that gonna happen? And because I know you have family up here,
Yeah.
and family's one thing and business is another, and so I understand there's
Yeah,
a
when I go to
difference.
visit mom, I can't just say, "Oh, I'm going today. I'm gonna visit peeps."
Exactly, yeah. Um, so yeah, anyway, my condensed how I wandered into this corner of the internet, this corner of the matrix. Um, yeah, so in college, wasn't a very good student either, and I took all the intro courses. I was kind of wandering in college a lot, and never took a philosophy course either. And that this is all relevant. So I didn't really know what to do with my life, and I eventually graduated, and the economy crashed, and a couple years later, I got a job, and then I was in my job for a while, and it's like, well, this I didn't really choose to be here. I just sort of got thrown here. I think people can relate to that in their mid 20s, and so I sort of was moonlighting as a video multimedia production guy, and my brother was into multimedia. He went to school for it, so my free time I would learn Final Cut and Adobe and audio, visual, and lighting and stuff, and all the things that you know how to do and that you can. Luckily nowadays we can self teach ourselves if that makes
Yeah,
sense. So,
yeah.
and so here's where the odd stuff starts to happen. And I sent you an email before, but you might not have seen it. I had a list of things that I wanted to talk about, but just as a prep. But while you look for it, I can tell you or not. But anyway, I want to just talk about like fate and like weird things that happen in life and
Okay,
um, God's plan or dumb
okay.
luck or like or how how a Calvinist would see it. I've heard you explain Calvinism a few times, obviously, and there's the assumption that people have about Calvinism, and you have obviously a much more nuanced approach to it. So I'm just keeping that in the back of your mind as I go through some of this stuff.
Okay.
So my brother, he has a friend of a friend of his was working in politics, and there's this presidential campaign going on in Boston at the time, and so they called up my brother, and he's like, we have this assistant position for a video producer on the campaign. Are you interested? And he went in. He said, "It's not for me." He's not at the assistant level at that time. He was more higher up. And so he said, "Yeah, but my younger brother, he's he might be a good fit for this." So I went in and I interviewed, and I got the job as an assistant video producer on the campaign. So for the next 6 months, I was working in politics at the headquarters and making little online videos, and it was just a total. I was very much a fish out of water. I was not like a Politico at the time,
Hmm.
and so it was a very weird, very exciting, very unusual thing to just have kind of fall into your lap a little bit.
Hmm.
Uh, but it was great. I worked hard, and people got along, and ultimately we lost. It was we were on the losing team. So when that happened, they all went back to DC, and I stayed up in Greater Boston and went back into construction for a little while. And then I kind of parlayed that experience into working for Harvard as a videographer.
Okay.
So I was filming classes, and yeah, I mean, I spent the next like 5 years there filming classes and just lecture after lecture, bringing my camera, setting it up, and doing the online video thing. And I was bringing a laptop, and we were live streaming the lectures. This was like 2015, 2016, and this was before everybody was using Zoom.
Yeah.
I was the trailblazer with Zoom. So Harvard, we were we were I would set it all up and then connect the camera into the computer and film the class. And so funny thing is if Peterson was still working there when I was working there, I probably would have filmed his classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would have been, I mean, it was
It
10
would
year
have been
gap
better
in
done.
between. Oh yeah, his Harvard classes were pretty poorly done. That was like the late 80s, though not the mid 90s, I think, or early
Yeah,
2000s.
yeah, they were pretty early. But
And
even the Toronto classes were well, they were a little better. That they were quite a bit better. You could hear the sound and everything. But some of the early ones, I mean, some of the later ones were good, but as you went back, they got clearly he was just setting up a laptop and trying to capture it.
I think he said it was his iPad. I think that's when he was doing it himself. I think, if I recall right. So yeah, so we had a higher standard in the whole, and the whole thing is like this. Now with COVID, everybody is part of this conversation about what's better, in person or remote.
Yeah,
and so this is what I would think about all the time. And my responsibility was to make it as if the students at home weren't missing out on anything.
yeah.
So it was like they were supposed to be a 1-to-1.
Yeah,
and really, I know that's impossible, but
yeah.
you're supposed to achieve. That's the goal, that you try to achieve.
Yeah.
And I had my gear. I was a dedicated, I was following the action. I had the right audio.
Yep.
And then when COVID hit, everybody was just using their cell phone. Like, it was just such a poor quality. And so people were accustomed to the horrible quality. And I don't blame them. That's terrible. Like, why would you want to listen to this lecture? I wouldn't have wanted to do it in that way. But anyway, just because it is a big conversation, but it's not something I had written down, but maybe people can relate to it, is who is it good for? Who really is online good? Because it is good for a lot of people, but not good for everybody, I think. There is a huge opportunity for people to learn so much on YouTube or even other websites that never existed before. And I think it's important to try to realize that it is still an opportunity. It's not this horrible thing where it's like, oh, in person is better. I get it. But if you have a good quality video and a good lecture, and it's a huge opportunity. And I did a lot of learning that way. It's, listening to you and Peterson and Vervaeke, and it's such an enormous resource to appreciate.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And so that's where I first got my first taste of philosophy. And this is there was the intro philosophy course called Philosophy 105, which was called The Meaning of Life. And so it's very much fits into this whole conversation of the meaning crisis.
Yeah.
And so it's this was in 2015 when I filmed it, and that's when I learned about Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and all the postmoderns, and I got the first taste of all that great wisdom. And I'll say more about this later, but that was sort of what even brought me. I could say that was the first pivot back towards like religiosity and back to Christianity. And I've said that to some Christians, and they kind of hear the word philosophy and they kind of like, what do you mean philosophy? Like, and I'm, no, but I mean, I'm still on your team, it's okay. Like I like philosophy, but Jesus is cool too. Like, so people get a little skittish, but I don't think they should be. But that's why the whole estuary idea is cool, is because it integrates all that. The people from estuary aren't afraid of people who say they like philosophy.
No. Hopefully the people in estuary aren't too afraid, period.
Yeah. I don't think they are. And so, yeah, let me see if there's anything more in my background that is relevant. So basically and then I stumbled into this little corner of the matrix. That was I had a little bit of a dark night of the souls, I guess you could say, in between. Like, won't really and like a month later, Peterson was on Rogan, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like the timing, and
Yeah.
that was like 2017. So from
Yeah.
2015, 2016, 2017, all this stuff started to converge. And yeah, and that's how I ended up in this. So I started listening to you around when you started, basically.
Okay.
The recommendation algorithm say, here's a pastor talking about Jordan Peterson. And it was late 2017 or early 2018 when that happened.
Yep.
And to put like a little bit of more idiosyncrasy here about my weird journey so far is so the Peterson Vanderklay Orthodox pipeline. So I didn't, Peugeot for me wasn't the connector to Orthodoxy. It was this other guy on YouTube, Jay Dyer. And
oh yeah. Yeah.
he's I guess, you know, the pejorative, the ortho bro is more in line with him. But anyway, that pipeline is legitimate, I think. You know, it's and he deals with a lot more philosophy, and he'll talk about Plato and all that stuff. But Peugeot and him have done a conversation. So I don't know if you ever seen it, but
I didn't watch it, but I knew that they did. I know a lot of people were sort of, but they sort of come at it from different angles. I mean, Peugeot was an artist.
Yeah. And you know, it was controversial on both camps, but
I'm sure
it was it was a long time coming. I'm glad they did it, and they're friends now, I guess. And but I think what it illustrates is that pipeline of in different paths people take to get, once their mind gets opened up, you know, philosophy can lead back to Christianity and in all sorts of ways. And I think that's pretty cool. And I like Peugeot too. Peugeot is great. And then the Reiki, the meaning crisis, awakening from the meaning crisis. That was just, I watched that's 2 semesters worth of lectures. Isn't that crazy?
That's a big chunk.
It's 2 full semesters.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I guess the meaning crisis, so maybe I could say a little bit more about that course that I filmed, The Meaning of Life.
Is it online or is it?
It's not online. And
okay.
So I guess, so I do kind of want to find co-founders for an estuary up here. Right?
Okay. In the Boston area?
Yeah.
That shouldn't be too hard.
Well, I mean, I hope so. I really hope so. And I mean co-founders, because I probably wouldn't be able to do it myself. I'm not much of like, I work better in a team, I think. And plus with my production skills, I can bring my camera and my equipment. And so what I'm kind of having in mind for that is like adding a third element to the thinking and talking.
Yeah.
So it's thinking, talking, and then working on a project, producing, thinking, talking, and then doing some kind of project of like a lecture series or something. And this is obviously my influence on the project if it ever goes forward. And like the founder always has like that initial influence, but I'm hopefully I'm seeking more input, you know. But this is just my initial take is like maybe try to film away the meaning of life, make a lecture series, The Meaning Crisis, The Meaning of Life, and then at the end of it have like a package, have like a series of videos that kind of like the Thunder Bay, basically.
Yeah.
Because I've been filming lectures for years and years. It's like a second nature for me, and it's a skill that I have and the equipment that I have, and I just don't have the people or the lecture hall anymore. So
so this is what's emerging from the estuary movement. It's like first it sort of starts with an estuary group, and then certain groups are sort of leveling up into what I'm calling sort of an estuary hub, because they're doing events. Now, Thunder Bay did an event without really an estuary. Chicago was one of the first sort of at this, and they've done two annual events. Germany is planning to have annual events. Southern California is trying to get something arranged for for March, possibly. But if you want something in the Boston area, you know, I know people, Kale down in Rhode Island, I think he'd be all over this. And
Awesome.
obviously, I mean, I can get space in Whitensville.
That would be good.
I mean, I can easily get space because you know, of course, there are 2 Christian Reformed churches in Whitensville, and I know both pastors fairly well, and both have been expressing interest in this. But as pastors, they're nervous about time commitments, as you know, as pastors normally are, because they have daytime jobs. But they're also interested in this because they're both personal friends of mine. And so, no, if you want to develop an event for Massachusetts, and Whitensville's sort of nice because it sort of spans Boston and Providence.
Yeah, yeah, it's about an hour away from me. It's no big deal.
Yeah, so there are plenty of people in Boston or in Whitensville who commute to Boston, and you know, my mother lives, you know, it's fairly close to Providence. It's often a split. Do I fly into Boston or do I fly into Providence?
Right.
So no, so after this, we can connect on email, and I can connect you up with some people, and we can talk
That would be
about
wonderful.
putting together an event. My family would love it because, of course, you know, it just means I usually tack, you know, little family times at the beginning or the end of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So any more reps for me to get to Massachusetts, my mother and sister will give a big thumbs up for. So
yeah, that's tremendous. And so it's related about the ins and outs of starting a group like this. And I do Meetup, and I have done Meetups in the past, and sometimes they kind of collapse, and sometimes they last longer, and sometimes they get smaller and smaller. And so I go to this Meetup at a pub, and it's a theologically oriented pub Meetup, and you know, I have a Bud Light or 2, and you know, it's kind of like going into the village to talk to just the average person. And there's about 4 regulars. It's about once a month. And it's very much like an estuary, although I don't think any of them are familiar with this corner of the matrix. And so they, you know, there's a Catholic, there's a guy that's very atheistic but very open-minded, and then there's a few other people that come, a couple Masons, a couple like Protestants, and we just had a guy from Eastern religion come in. And so the thing about it is, like, it's been mentioned a couple videos ago, like the newcomers, how do you get people up to speed with the conversation? And then I think Sam mentioned this is all the parasocial stuff that I don't think parasocial is a bad term, but I definitely know more about everybody than they know about me. So
is that I've never heard the term parasocial. What does that mean?
It's very much like it's a term from the 50s from some academics that a lot of streamers have taken up nowadays to like criticize their audience of getting too close. Like, so it basically means like there's somebody who's a streamer or a radio host, and if you feel like you're their friend, and like they're not your friend, but you feel like you're their friend.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like a cool thing about talk radio. It's like, you want people to feel like you're friends.
Yeah.
But people on Twitch have taken it to be like parasitic. There's like, and I can understand where like maybe there's some young women that get too much attention that they didn't expect. Where like, you know, perhaps there's more men online than there are women, and perhaps these men like to think that, you know, the worst case is not the worst case, but a case would be like a guy brings a bouquet of flowers to their favorite Twitch streamer, and it's like, whoa, you crossed the line there, dude. Like, and it's like,
well, if it's just a bouquet of flowers, it might be a nice gesture. But if it's a bid to something romantic, you have crossed the line.
You can imagine where the line gets crossed. And,
yes.
And so for me, I like parasocial is kind of cool. Is like, I watched Jacob's video. I never talked to Jacob, and I barely have gone onto the Discord. I've only done the Discord to do the Q&A.
Yeah.
The Friday Q&A. And so anyway, I mentioned that because I think it's relevant here, and I think it's kind of cool. But Sam was saying about his Meetup, that it's getting smaller and smaller, and there's less and less newcomers.
Yeah.
And he said, if he ever had a newcomer, what would they do to bring him into the group?
Yeah.
Like, how would they catch him up to speed? And so
Yeah.
the project, this is a long-term project, but
Yep.
I think it's in line with that philosophy course that I filmed, because that was basically, I was a newcomer and I was filming it, so I had to be there. And so I watched 26 hours of lectures about the meaning of life. And as a newcomer, I went from, well, basically I got the whole picture. Basically,
Yep.
I went from nothing to the whole picture.
Yep.
And it took 26 hours, but maybe we can dwindle that down to 13 or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe 6.
Yeah.
6 is probably pushing it, but it's going to take a lot of hours. I think
Yeah.
it's because you got to get through. You want to do it justice. You want to talk about all of it, all the relevant stuff. And so I guess the big long-term project that, in my dreams, I guess, is like this intro to philosophy course that covers the meaning crisis, or the lack of meaning crisis, in a way that Vervaeke did it very academically, and a wonderful resource, and I'm grateful for him to do that. I think maybe like soften it up a bit, maybe bring it down to the village level.
Yeah.
Because at Thunder Bay, you were talking about the village and the academy and
the monastery and
in the monastery,
yeah,
in the church, in the church. And so, so if anybody's listening out there and if they want to come to Greater Boston and work on
well, there's 2 other guys, both with experience and resources, who have been talking about this too. And so it's interesting that this continues to sort of bubble up as a need for this little corner to put together some sort, probably be video, some sort of on-ramp for people to say, this is how you can sort of get up to speed. The difficulty is that you're sort of you're trying to get up to speed on a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
And that the target keeps moving too, because sometimes the conversation's over here, sometimes the conversation's over there, and there's very much sort of a hive mind going on. And of course Peterson's in that mix too, and so then he'll go talk to this Muslim dude, or then he'll talk to this guy over here, and then he'll talk to Sam Harris, and sort of it's a lot.
So I'll tell you where that philosophy course, where it stopped. The train stopped towards this positive psychology, modern day psychology, and very much kind of in the Peterson area. So what else? There's something. So I guess my point is that, so the Harvard philosophy department, this was like their flagship course for the undergraduates. So they put a lot of effort into designing it and making it available and approachable for a major. I think they completed, like, I think their last and final series of lectures was like a good, solid landing zone for people. And if I can, I'll try to recall exactly.
Who taught it?
This German guy, and a few different people teach it depending on which year. I'm not even sure it's offered anymore.
Okay.
But his name was Matthias Rissa.
Okay.
Matthias Rissa. And I filmed another one of his classes too. He was a really great professor. So I filmed 2 of his courses. But I'm not sure well, who knows? Maybe maybe he would be interested in doing, but.
Well, if we get an event together, part of what we learned in Thunder Bay is, don't keep it to just insiders in this little corner. Make sure you invite someone from the outside, and that outside can be anyone. But it really, part of what we're doing with these estuary hubs is we're saying that, it's like everything with estuary that I've sort of set up, it's very decentralized. So the group that is wanting to put together the conference, they get to decide who they want for sort of the speakers. So I'm talking to somebody is talking about a conference in another important metro area in the US, and he's thinking me and then some other people that names would have been recognized, but they're not necessarily Peugeot and Vervaeke. And I really encourage that people think creatively about who they want to get around the table. So
Yeah,
And in the New England area, you've got lots of people.
There's a lot of resources here, a
There's
lot of
ton
standing
of
reserves.
resources. Yeah. Yeah.
As Heidegger might say, the
Yeah.
standing reserve.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So I think the connection of like just general intro philosophy. Anyway, that's sort of like a good stepping stone because there's such a rich history there. There's so much. There's obviously the Christian. It overlaps with Christianity, and like during that course they talked a lot about Aquinas and Augustine, and so we obviously went through the medieval period. Yeah, so let me see if that's. Oh, so in the email I said
I can't find your email.
maybe okay.
I searched
I
your
say
name, but
Robert
yeah,
dot.
you don't
then
have
my
to say
last
you don't
name.
have to say
Yeah,
it
no,
on
I wasn't going to.
because I got your email with the link for today's talk.
It would.
But
Let me
pause. Let me pause.
Okay.
Recording. All right, there we go. Okay, I got the list.
Okay, so one of the points. We kind of skipped over the fate in the God's plan thing, but maybe that's not. Maybe we can come back to that later.
Okay.
The finer points of estuaries, and so there was a point about Kanye that I wanted to, and I understand it's totally controversial, and I'm not here to like rustle any feathers or anything. It's just one tiny little, because it's really getting out of hand now because they took his last video off YouTube, and so the Drink Champs is the one I watched was on Drink Champs, and they took that one down. I never heard of it either until this past weekend, and so he was talking about Drake, this musician Drake.
Yeah.
And he said that Drake runs the culture because all the girls go to the Drake concerts. And so the point was wherever all the girls go, that's where the culture ends up going, because then the guys have to follow where the girls go. And so this is where the controversy comes in with this group is like, if you want to start a group, or so it was like Peterson had a group of men listening, and
right.
People would always ask him, how come so many men listen? And he said, or at least back then he said, well, men listen because YouTube is mainly men, and maybe women just haven't heard me yet. And nowadays he's kind of like really focusing on the men thing. It's like he's leaning into the men thing. And the guy, David Fuller, also did that too. He kind of pivoted to this like masculinity thing. And I kind of say, no, I agree with Kanye here. Like you need to have at least a 1-to-1 ratio, or at least aim for a 1-to-1 ratio, because it's not a culture if it's just 80% men and 20% women. And I heard, here's another parasocial relation. I heard Sevilla mention that at Thunder Bay, there was only like 15% women. She said there wasn't as many women there, but
there weren't as many women. I haven't seen a 50-50 event in this space yet, but maybe it was 15%. I don't know. It could be.
I would settle for like 60-40 or something like that.
Yeah, that's closer. Peterson events in real life, there are a lot of women there.
Yeah, and so just the point. I mean, it's just the point of like, I think maybe try to come up with something that balances it out a little bit more to make it more of like a social gathering, because I think there is a lot of truth in that. Like, and I think a solution to the meaning crisis, I've said this in the comment section in one of your videos, if there is a real solution to the meaning crisis, it must also work for them too.
Well, absolutely.
You know? So it's not like it only works for men, you know?
Yeah.
And so logically speaking, you know,
well, and church in North America tends to work better for women than men.
Yeah.
I mean, same with Catholic Church. You go to Catholic Church, there's a lot of women. Evangelical church is a lot of women. Black church is a lot of women.
Right.
My church has more women than men.
Well, I guess it's just a matter of time and finding the right space.
Yeah. I think men tend to be, I mean, the mountain men were men. I'm sure there's a woman or two, but, and then pioneers and settlers. I mean, usually it's at the level of settlers that the women start coming. I
Okay.
mean, when you look
Okay.
at, say, westward expansion in the U.S. and U.S. history, the gender is the sex differences are very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was I guess the Puritans were the ones that were successful in the colonies, and they had families too,
Yep.
right? It was
Yep.
the southern colonies were mostly men, so
Yeah.
that's
Southern colony.
congruent.
That was they were drug dealers, and the drug was tobacco.
Yeah, tobacco. That's really funny. Okay, so let's see. So I made the Kanye point, and so basically, I guess maybe ecumenicalism is another thing I wanted to talk about. That was on the Jacob's channel.
Yeah.
He had the
Yeah.
review.
I just released that at 10 a.m. this morning. So that's just going out now. So it'll be on my channel too. I
Cool.
watched it. I immediately contacted Jacob, said, I want to put this on my channel. He said, please.
Yeah,
So
I watched it. I watched it like 2 days ago, whatever. I
yeah.
watched it already. It was pretty good, and they were really thoughtful. A lot of great takeaways. Um, what did you have anything you wanted to say first, or because I was
No,
going to
no,
talk a
keep
little bit
going.
about the ecumenical aspect of it, and so like Father Eric, right? Is that his
Yep.
name?
Yep.
Father Eric and Sarah, who is the woman?
Catherine.
Catherine and her husband. And so they all agreed that ecumenism had its place, and it's good to do, and it's a good practice. But towards after they said all that, they kind of came to this conclusion that it sort of has a lifespan almost, like it comes to its conclusion, and then you're left with like, okay, now what? And um I don't know if this is just like an open question, or if there's an answer to it, or it's kind of like what next is sort of like where I'm at right now. And this is an open question I've had for a while. And like, what if, well, I don't want to get too bleak, but I'm still optimistic that it's like a path towards the good, that it's something that we should encourage. And I think just maybe for them, and maybe for me too, that when you interact with other people with other worldviews, you can either accept their worldview or you can reinforce your own. And um, once your own is so reinforced, it sort of comes to this point, like where nothing really changes too much, and everybody just, yeah, you can go to the ecumenical barbecue or whatever, and you can have fun, you can play catch, and as long as everybody's comfortable and well fed and warm in the winter, there's no strife. We can keep doing these sorts of things. But is it really like an end state? Is it really the telos? Is it like, and I don't know. These are just questions I had. I don't know if you, what did you think about when they talked about that? Or
Well, I thought I thought it was excellent. I think the helpful thing to think about it is that these things are sort of like waves. Waves are sort of cyclical and recursive. And what Father Eric said about the Reformation was dead on right. Luther was historically one of the greatest reformers of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the process by which this happened was chaotic and bloody and tragic in many respects. But a lot of the issues that Luther addressed, I was listening to a treatment of another treatment besides Reformations, which was the same book that I read that Father Eric read, another treatment. And there were serious issues in the Roman Catholic Church for hundreds of years in Europe that it was not being addressed. And Luther, in some ways, just went in there like a bull in the china shop and just broke a bunch of stuff. Now, it's helpful to remember that the Reformation by no means impacted Catholicism equally. I mean, Italy, France, Spain, many places in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe were not impacted by the Reformation the way Germany, the Netherlands, and England were. And part of the reason that the Reformation became so potent was because, for the most part, America was settled by by Protestant separatists. And so that's part of the reason that Protestantism really got magnified by the United States. But this process of Reformation, and to a degree, ecumenism when done right, is a reformational process. And it's
Okay.
both sides reforming. And I think we're seeing that in this little corner of the internet. I'm learning from Father Eric. I'm learning from Jonathan Pajot. I'm learning from John Vervaeke. They're learning from me, I hope. And together, I mean, we've seen this in the church as well. So, of course, you had Methodism. At the beginning of the 20th century, Methodism was the big enemy. Catholicism and Methodism, this is what Christian Reformed people were terrified of. Now, now in Christian Reformed hymnals, you have hymns from Charles Wesley, Wesley. So these things get worked through in time, and it requires, we can pretty much see that good faith conversation is vitally important. And Vervaeke's idea of dialogos is vitally important because it's unreasonable to expect that after, like Cale Zeldin and I've had a number of conversations, it's unreasonable to expect that I'm going to suddenly leave the Christian Reformed Church, or Cale Zeldin is going to leave the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
But at this point, that's fine. A lot of people are like, Paul, when are you going to become Orthodox? You've got the beard for it. No plans to become Orthodox. I am deeply Protestant, and these things are important, but what we do is, I think it's a process of reforming all of the traditions. And so I thought the conversation was excellent, and that was the point. Ironically, it's been funny. I've had a few comments on this little corner of the internet, because obviously the Orthodox Church has gotten some nice contributions from our movement. Roman Catholics have gotten some nice contributions. We haven't tended to see the Protestant contributions, the contributions to Protestant churches that are out there, but there are many of those as well. And when, for example, myself and John Van Donk and Job just became an elder in his Dutch Reformed Church in the Netherlands. And so there's been a lot of people not necessarily leaving their tradition, but I think what they're doing is sort of meeting in a common space and finding some helpful things and bringing it back to their tradition. I think that's true of John Vervaeke as well. I don't think he would keep participating if he weren't finding things that he genuinely found helpful, even as at this point he maintains himself as a non-theistic Neoplatonist. That's, I think, how he would call himself today.
Yeah.
So, we're all working on this stuff together, and it is deeply ecumenical. But what you see in church history is that, at the beginning of the 20th century, there's this big movement towards union churches. And you'll find them scattered throughout the US. The United Church of Canada is a great example of that. We had a variety of mainline denominations sort of came together. And I think part of what people took away from that was that there was a lot that was well-intentioned from it, but this sort of least common denominator sort of blunted and blurred the specific traditions, and a lot of the unique qualities of those traditions were lost in that effort. And for that reason, I think the whole uniting church ecumenical effort dissipated. And so with each of these new waves of ecumenicity, we're discovering and we're learning new things about what unity and diversity mean and how they can work together.
Wow, that's a really good answer. I noticed that too. Like, it strengthens, you go back and kind of, you're reinvigorated, or like you said, you go, it's not like a battle between you're not fighting over the village, sort of the people in the village who haven't made up their mind yet. It's not like a competition to go colonize them. It's sort of it's a way to strengthen your own positions, I guess, or maybe find things that are true. And that's one thing that Jacob and them talked about, was as long as everybody's focused on the truth and directed towards the truth, I shouldn't be afraid of what comes my way in terms of other ideas. So I really do appreciate that answer, and that's really valuable. And so the most recent stuff is like, do you think it could work beyond Christian faiths, but also towards like all faiths, and like, let's say any faith, interfaith stuff,
Yeah.
or maybe I don't mean to like throw another challenge at you, because but it's stuff that this is stuff that I see, like, could you take it into the secular world, into like ecumenism in terms of like political stuff, like could like could in political terms, is there
Yeah.
political ecumenism
Right.
and I think, I think the I think it could work. But maybe it's more of a challenge, and maybe it's not the scope of this conversation, but it's stuff that I think about a lot. And with my YouTube channel, by the way, so my handle on YouTube is IRLPOLITIK. So I do kind of the
Oh,
man on the street stuff, and so I like to ask questions in public, and
really?
it's not always that I stream, but I have like half a dozen streams out there. Um, so yeah, like I said, when I used to work in politics, um, I kind of have this. I kind of saw the inside of the factory a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so in the whole thing about religion, it provides your metaphysics, and your politics is based on metaphysics, and so it's all connected. At the base layer, there's metaphysics, and so it's, to me, it's all connected. Um, and I know sometimes you touch on politics, uh, and I'm not here to talk to politics in this
Right.
conversation, but
I,
to
I
like,
think I think one of
well,
the
to
big
me, it's just
challenge,
it's hard to disentangle.
yeah. I think one of the big challenges that we face right now was that the secularism, what happened in language was that secularism sort of was able to and contain what we understand as religious. And so then the idea was that secular would be a religious free zone.
Hmm.
And the difficulty that we're having is that we don't recognize that this was a deeply religious move done by religious people. And what that did was in many ways sublimate the religious assumptions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because when I look at, let's say, the American experiment, it is built on that, the separation of church and state. So there isn't a state church in the United States. They used to be state, and actually Massachusetts was one of the
Yeah, it
last.
was. Yeah.
It's not really a state; it's a commonwealth. It's one of the last state type things to get rid of their state
The first and the
church.
last.
Yeah. So part of the difficulty and part of what we're struggling with is to help people see the religion that is there, because as this modern invention of the secular state, as modernity recedes, what we're seeing is the resurgence of old patterns, where India is more self-consciously Hindu. And Islam, I mean, resurgent Islam came by virtue of this. It sort of rejected the Turkish model. At the end of the First World War, everyone imagined that Islam was dead. But then you
Mhm.
had this resurgent Islamism. And part of what we're seeing is a renegotiating of these spaces, because people are recognizing that beneath secularity there are in fact religious underpinnings, that if those are lost, the artifice of secularity falls,
Yes.
because it's too vacuous. It hid its religious underpinnings. And so once you expose the religious underpinnings, the secularity game is done. And now suddenly you have all of the horrors that the Protestant Catholic wars, had. And the Protestant Catholic wars were intended to, the secularity was developed to end the Protestant Catholic wars. And at least the intramural Protestant wars too, Lutherans, Reformed,
Mhm.
Anabaptists, and that was supposed to end all of that. Now, once that artifice goes away, will we now have, once again, sort of the camps of the nations with religious assumptions and underpinnings and presuppositions, once again warring? because in many ways, secularity did in fact conquer the world to a degree.
Yes.
So
And it's still conquering too. It's still
yeah,
trying.
it is.
It's still the predominant worldview in a lot of ways.
It's the predominant public worldview. I mean, the United Nations is
Mhm.
in a sense, the greatest Protestant missionary effort ever accomplished in the world. It is Christian imperialism. It is the most successful global Christian imperialist effort ever imagined, is the United Nations.
Really amazing. It all it yeah, it's really powerful stuff to think about.
Yeah.
And I'm not so I think there is hope that people could do some sort of interfaith ecumenism and not come to blows, obviously, and sort of learn more about themselves in their faith and try to point themselves towards the truth, and perhaps interfaith ecumenism will help us get more to the truth, and especially like with Vervaeke in the academy, participating, they can appreciate the drive towards truth as well, and
Well, so the crisis of the academy, I'm looking for Marsden's book here. I mean, partly the crisis of the academy was, so when Duke University was founded, they built a cathedral, not a mosque, not a synagogue. They built a cathedral at the center of the campus in order to try to foundationalize and instantiate the cultural values. That's not arbitrary. And the university had that as its hallmark, but as the 20th century progressed, especially after the Second World War, universities, you still find it on university campuses all over the place. They're designed as Christian institutions, and they abandoned it. Now again, you have that secularity issue, and I would say that what they didn't do was actually they sort of they said, well, we're not a religion, and you go all kinds of places that have agendas that say we're not a religion. It's like, really? You go into a yoga studio, one of the first things they'll tell you is we're not a religion. It's like, what are those statues over there? What are those symbols on the wall? Why do you start with Om? I mean, what do you mean? It's like walking into a church with a crucifix and a priest and the mass, and we're not a religion. And Protestants tried this. I mean, Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. I mean, that was evangelicals' move on that part. And so at some point you're going to have to say, okay, well, stop this now. Let's just say, okay, all of life is religious. Religious is sort of the largest operational map that we have for the world. Okay. And what we have now is globalism has continued to progress since it really got kicked off by Columbus. We're going to have to come to terms with a plurality of presuppositions. And we want to do that with a minimum of bloodshed and a maximum of clarity, let's say. But that's what we're doing.
Yeah. It's cool to be a part of it, at least in this, this corner of the matrix, as I'm saying, as I'm calling it. Ecumenism. Good. Let's keep doing it. Reciprocal broadening. Let's keep doing that. Yep. Reciprocal broadening. Let's connect the village square with the academy and the church. Let's do all those things.
Well, and you live in New England.
Yeah.
Drive through town after town after town. What's in the middle of what's right there on the
town common? Yeah, the town common.
That's the church.
So, well, yeah, and exactly, yeah, the church is next to the common, but the common is the common is a political concept here.
Yes.
Like and so actually I was kind of, in terms of like a meetup group, I was kind of wrestling with the idea of like common ground as like a sister to Estuary or something. But it's I like coming up with names and stuff. I like music and stuff like that. So I'm always like thinking of lyrical stuff. And so the idea of the common or the town square is it's so like with Vervaeke, he says he's a physicalist. So it's like there's a physical place.
Yep.
Where like, so that fits in with physicalism. It's like,
Yep.
you can't deny that this place is real and it has a meaning and it's
Yep.
part of the metaphysic of the whole country.
Yep.
And
you have your
it's
physic and you have your metaphysic. I mean, that's some way to talk about the upper and lower registers.
yeah. And it's like it really does cross right into the town square, I guess, the town common.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. But I know we're closing in on time. I just want to, I think I covered everything I kind of wanted to say. So the problem with the newcomers, maybe I can finish up with that, like getting newcomers up to speed. That's always a rich thing to think about. So maybe the cognitive science stuff would have to wait till the end. Maybe we build it, whatever this ends up, whatever the solution is for the newcomers. I think maybe the cog size stuff comes towards the end, and maybe the base layer metaphysical stuff, the epistemology, history of philosophy, maybe that's towards the front end of it, whatever it is. And that way, because it's hard to get the cog sci as a relevant landing zone without having gone through the history of philosophy in a general sense. You kind of have to go through Nietzsche. You kind of have to hear the story of Zarathustra, God is dead. And, if God is dead, everything's permissible. You kind of have to have that sort of, that middle work from him, Nietzsche, that sort of sets up the meaning crisis. If well, obviously. And then there's other things that can be touched upon, like Spinoza, even like Spinoza's ethics could be, I think Vervaeke talked about Spinoza in his meaning crisis videos. Anyway, there's like a whole syllabus basically that could be crowdsourced, or I could somehow, this is like a dream. This is like a fantasy basically, but you can kind of see it, I think. So it's like the welcome series for newcomers. And you kind of want to be gentle, but you kind of want to make it fun too. You want to make it so that people aren't bored, because pure straight up philosophy 101 that goes through the history of philosophy can be pretty boring. If like you're starting with Thales and Anaximander, like it's interesting for me, but like people are going to kind of zone out, I think, in the first couple lectures. If you start like right at the beginning, you're like, okay, day one, the pre-Socratics, like, but yeah, I kind of want the audience maybe to think about it too. Maybe they can input ideas to, like a crowdsourced project, but maybe the people in New England can shape it. Maybe we can, and I have the equipment, I have the cameras, I have microphones, we just need like a lecture hall and some interesting speakers and maybe a PowerPoint screen,
Well, I like I said, I think finding a space isn't too hard for me. I can do that.
Yeah.
And gathering speakers, I don't think would be too hard either. The key element is gathering basically your leadership team and your ownership stakes, and figuring out exactly how you want to put these things together. And I'll send you an email, and I'll include a bunch of these other guys that I know would be interested in this, and we'll see what kind of conversation. And if now you're intending that I share this video, right?
No, of course not. No,
because this too will generate, we will just based on my experience, we will find a half a dozen at least people in New England that hear this video and say, I'm in, I want in. Now,
that's
in
awesome.
terms of in terms of sort of the on-ramp, I think there's probably going to have to be multiple attempts at on-ramps. In terms of getting the conversation started as a preacher, one of the things that I often go to is there you really do try to start it as broad a common denominator as possible. And actually, early at Monday, I released my my video where I did some commenting on John Vervaeke's conversation with Nathan Ormond. And in many ways, if if you can hold yourself together enough, your critics are super blessings to have, because your critics will actually tell you where you're not communicating well. And so Nathan clearly did not go through awakening from the meaning crisis.
Oh, Nathan, I saw that video. Yeah, I saw that video. Yeah.
He did not go through awakening from the meaning crisis. And he tripped up on all of these Vervaeke terms that when John sort of very, non-defensively just sort of walked through, these are the terms, we're using them in cognitive science, they're in published papers, they're in this little inside group. But it does show that relevance realization, combinatorial explosiveness, none of these things are out there in the general population. And whether or not those terms are the best terms to have out in the general population is debatable. But what happens in the process, and as a preacher, my focus tends to be, how can I explain the reality of, which is basically something that cognitive science, Jordan Peterson, Peugeot, Peterson, and Vervaeke, part of what holds them all together is the realization that the naive viewing of the world, there's a lot more behind it than meets the eye. We just walk into a room and I see stuff, and you don't recognize that tree that you see is actually, there's a lot that's gone into that tree that you see. You didn't see the leaves, you didn't see the branches, you didn't see the bark, you saw tree. And so then kind of opening that up, and because I think in many ways it's that moment that sort of begins the exploration of, well, gosh, because sort of atheist materialism kind of said, no, there's trees and there's squirrels and there's everything. And at this level, there's clearly no God, like God is a thing like a tree and a squirrel that we can sort of find. Now, of course, cognizant Roman Catholics will say, we've always known this. Well, maybe not, maybe the theologians will say it, and they have said it, but they haven't said it in a way that people can understand, because, and that's in some ways a specific challenge of Christianity, because we say Jesus is God. And so, oh, well, I can see a tree, I can see a squirrel, I can see a man called Jesus. So is God the same thing as the tree and a squirrel? Another thing within the world? So, this is a big challenge to try to, in an accessible way, broaden the conversation.
Yes. It's a good challenge, though.
It's a good
challenge.
An interest.
It's a endlessly fascinating one to consider. It's 2:00, and
I got to land the plane. I got another rando that's sitting there.
Thank you for your time and attention, everybody.
All right, and I will send you an email, and we'll try and get this ball started.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.